Welcome everyone to our first Columbia Urology Medical Student Town Hall. My name is Gina Bottolato. I'm on faculty here at Columbia, and I run the medical student clerkships here. We have a panel of our faculty and residents who will be joining us this evening as part of the town hall. Dr. James McKiernan, our chair, will be speaking. Dr. Kimberly Cooper, our program director, myself, Dr. Christopher Anderson, who's a urologic oncologist and staff and also involved in medical education. And some of our residents will also be speaking during the second half. These are residents at various levels of training. We welcome your questions in the Q&A portion, and we'll address those at the end of the town hall. So I'm going to invite Dr. McKiernan to introduce himself and start the presentation. You should be able to advance your slides, or I can advance them for you.
Thank you, Gina. Thanks so much. And thanks to Dr. Cooper, Dr. Bottolato, Dr. Anderson for organizing this event, and really thank everyone for joining. We realize this is an unusual medium. It's an unusual moment in time, and particularly in the last 72 hours, it's an extremely unusual moment in our country. So I really just wanted to open up by maybe taking a moment of silence for respect and honor of Mr. Floyd and all of the victims of racial injustice in the United States. If everyone would just join me for a few brief moments of silence. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And, you know, as unusual as it is when we design these types of events to try to educate you about our program and our hospital, we can't always predict the context of what's happening around us in New York City, in the country. When we drew up our plans for this year, we didn't prepare for a global pandemic. Certainly when we drew up our plans for the past few weeks, we did not predict to be in this moment, but I will tell you that our institution, both a hospital, which is known as New York Presbyterian Hospital, and our university, Columbia University, has for many years prided themselves in an environment of both healthcare justice and social justice, where the fabric of our community in New York, probably one of the most diverse areas in the United States, this is a fundamental principle in what we do. And during the last few days in New York City, as many of you have noticed around the country in your own cities, that's been put to the test. And it's something that hopefully will bring us out to a moment that's a far brighter future for our country, for our hospital, for our university, and for our program. And we'd like to take our time tonight to really dedicate to teaching you about our program and bring you up to speed on where we are. We realize that the venue here, the way we're doing this is not exactly the normal way of doing things, but we're going to hopefully get through that as well, and hopefully open up for a lot of questions at the end, and look forward to a vibrant discussion. So our Department of Urology is based, as I said, in Columbia University. It's part of a larger healthcare system within a hospital known as New York Presbyterian Hospital, which is one of the larger healthcare systems in New York City. It's actually a combination of 8 different hospital campuses, the 2 main campuses of which are represented by 2 academic medical centers, one Columbia University and the other Cornell University. This is a photograph of our department recently taken with our graduating chief residents of last year in the front, alongside all of our faculty and our residency. This is on our campus here in New York City, in between some of the open space, which does exist in New York City, some green space, not a lot of it, but some of it. And we do this every year as an event. Ironically, this year, for the first time, we cannot gather like this. So this photograph was taken last May, and we probably won't, unfortunately, be able to do this because of the social distancing policies in place this year. Let me just see if I can advance the slides there, Gina. There we go. Great. So our department actually is one of the older departments of urology in the United States. It actually was founded over 100 years ago. It's now 103 years old. It was founded in 1917, and since that time has had several leaders of the department. It was founded in the university before the advent of our current hospital system, which began in 1929. Its first founder, J. Bentley Squire, was the first urologist to serve as the president of the American College of Surgeons. It's had a storied history of leaders since that time. Dr. Cahill in the 1930s through 50s, Dr. John K. Latimer Dr. Carl Olson, who's pictured here, as well as Dr. Mitchell Benson recently. And then I assumed the position of chair in 2014. So this fall will be my 6th year as chair of the department. I'm honored to lead the group of people that we have here, and honored really to be responsible for overseeing the training of the residents that come through the department, and build the department up to the position where it can actually train people to become fantastic leaders in the field, both clinically as well as academically. Let's see if I can figure this out. There we go. Thank you. So a little bit of nuts and bolts on what we have here. Right now we have 18 MD faculty on the main campus, about 68 administrative employees that support us, 12 nurses, 3 research PhDs that we work closely with, and about a total of 100 full-time employees in the department. We have several new additions in the past year, one of which is in the area of men's health and andrology, and that's Joseph Alukel. The other actually has not arrived yet, and that's Julia Finkelstein in the Department of Pediatrics, who will be joining us this summer. And then a new director of our Veterans Affairs program, that's Isaac Faina, who joined us last year in the summer of 2019 and heads up our program at the Bronx VA. Just a couple of different metrics. One of the things about our institution as an area of scientific learning, Columbia University has a very deep and broad background in basic science research and multiple Nobel laureates on campus. And as recently as last year was cited as one of the top institutions in the country in terms of healthcare institutions and their research product. So when it comes to things like impact factor in journals or major publications in journals, Columbia was actually ranked 2nd in the United States after UT Southwestern, and having the most impactful overall research product. That's not just in urology, but it's across all different disciplines in the biomedical sciences. Our hospital, as I mentioned, New York Presbyterian Hospital, this year as a hospital entity was ranked number 5 in the United States, behind the Mayo Clinic, Mass General, Johns Hopkins, and Cleveland Clinic, as a hospital by US News and World Report. So 2 really storied institutions that are merged to form an academic medical center, and have been merged now for over 20 years. And that merger has been extremely successful. Some mergers in healthcare have not. This one has actually resulted in a great deal of synergy and really creates the environment within which we train residents today. Seems like I'm jumping around here, Gina. Let's see. There we go. Great. So I'm going to walk now through some of the clinical divisions, including some individual faculty members that we have, some of whom are on the call tonight. Not all of them will be speaking, but I'll give you just a rundown of the who's who in our department. So within the division of urologic oncology is myself, who I focus predominantly in bladder cancer, Dr. Christopher Anderson, Dr. Mitchell Benson, Dr. Joel DeCastro, Isaac Faina, I mentioned earlier, who is at the Bronx VA, is our chief there. Dr. Eli Hyams, Dr. Sven Wensky, and Anthony Lutz, who's our nurse practitioner in the Division of Oncology, and Diana Botero, who's RN in the division. So a relatively big part of our department, both in prostate, bladder, kidney cancer, minimally invasive surgery, robotic surgery, and open surgery. We partner very closely with our university's Division of GU Medical Oncology. We actually have several joint clinics with the Division of Medical Oncology every week. And that is headed up by a doctor named Charles Drake, who's an immuno-oncologist and an MD PhD who runs a lab in immunology research and geo-oncology. And he's joined by his faculty, which is Dr. Matt Dallos, Dr. Jessica Hawley, Emerson Lim, and Dr. Mark Stein, all pictured here. And we do collaborate with them in clinical trials and translational research as well. So they're available as mentors in scientific training. In neurourology and voiding dysfunction, the division is headed up by Dr. Matthew Ruttman. He's joined in that group by Dr. Gina Bottolato, Dr. Doreen Chung, Dr. Kimberly Cooper, and this is one of our first groups that actually has a clinical fellowship, which currently the fellow is Dr. Lunan G, who's a 1-year clinical fellow in voiding dysfunction and female pelvic medicine, and that group has a dedicated RN, Michelle Korish. Sorry about that. Let's see if we can go back there. I don't want to jump over anybody. All right, we'll take this one next, reconstructive urology, and that's headed by Dr. Stephen Brandis, who's a division chief and also has a fellowship program. He's joined there as well by Dr. Dorian Chung, who does female pelvic medicine and reconstruction. Going back to endourology, this group is headed up by Dr. Ojas Shah, who's a division chief, and joined in that division is Dr. Gina Bottolato, Dr. Kelly Healy, Dr. David Weiner, and they have a clinical fellow one-year program as well in endourology. Currently, that's occupied by Dr. Ron Golan, and they work closely with one of our registered dietitians, Emily Whalen, who works in the department in both cancer and stone disease. Okay, then we have reconstruction. We touched on that. And then pediatric urology currently is Dr. Christina Carpenter. She's being joined, as I mentioned earlier, by Dr. Julia Finkelstein. This summer is coming out of her fellowship in Boston, and they have a registered nurse, Ms. Christine De La Rosa, also in their division. Then men's health and sexual medicine, we have 2 dedicated faculty members who are fellowship trained in this area, Dr. Joseph Alukal, who is now celebrating just about 1 year on our faculty, and Dr. Peter Stahl, who's been with us now for just about 9 years, and they're joined by a physician's assistant in that group. That group will be creating and adding a new clinical 1-year fellowship this summer, so they'll have their first ever fellow starting in July. We do have a fairly dedicated and developed program in general urology and consultative hospital urology. That's headed by David Weiner, and he's joined there by 2 nurse practitioners and an LPN, Bill Bonner, Nancy Serbion, and Crystal Cigars. And that group actually does cover what we call the acute care urology service, which is the next slide. This is really a hospital-based service that oversees both intraoperative and floor-based consults at our main academic medical center. And this is a group model, which has allowed us to cover an extensive amount of quaternary care urology throughout the hospital, as well as do some academic clinical research projects in emergency medicine for urology emergencies such as urosepsis. Okay. We have one other group that we work closely with, and that's a division of our department, which is actually very distant from us in Miami Beach. Sometimes confuses students and applicants because it is a distinct residency program in and of itself under the umbrella of Columbia University. It actually matches 2 residents in urology. It's distinct from our program, but all of the faculty there are interviewed and overseen by us, and eventually their quality control and academic affiliation is through our division. They are all actually employed by Columbia University. And you see here, Dr. Alan Nieder is the division chief. He's joined by a full spectrum of fellowship trained doctors within his group, and they have a fantastic growing program there. And their residency is also doing some virtual open houses and virtual tours. So you might want to look that up. It is distinct from us, independent of us. Occasionally, some of our residents will choose to do electives at that site, but it's a distinct residency. That's something you should understand. Okay, so our program, if you didn't know already, is a 6-year program. We're one of the, I guess, relatively small fraction of programs in the United States that still remains a 6-year program and has a fully protected and funded year of research within the 6 years of training. And that research has many opportunities, but one of the strongest suits of our group is based on Columbia University's extensive scientific background. Within our department and with our affiliates, we have 4 major labs that are focused on urologic research, one headed by PI Kathy Mendelson, who has an extensive developmental biology and pediatric urology background, studying developmental abnormalities of the GU tract, as well as bladder cancer, stem cells, and cells of origin in bladder cancer development. Dr. Charles Drake, I mentioned earlier, is an MD PhD scientist who runs a lab in tumor immunology and the tumor microenvironment, focused predominantly in kidney and prostate cancer. Dr. Corey Abate Shen, who is chairman actually of the Department of Pharmacology, who oversees a lab based in the focus on animal models of prostate and bladder cancer. And then Dr. Michael Shen, who is focused predominantly on developing organoid-based recapitulations of human cancer and bladder cancer and prostate cancer. So all these are opportunities to work during the research year or, in fact, during the clinical years in translational programs, either affiliated with these labs or directly embedded inside these labs. And just some of the productivity from the various aspects of these labs over the last several years have been multiple awards. And if you're interested in these, we can go into them in more detail during the later processes of the interviews. But We have a PO1 grant in bladder cancer, one of the few in the United States, a Prostate Cancer Foundation grant, a V Foundation Science grant, an NIDDK O'Brien Center of Excellence grant. So these are all extramural, either foundation or federally funded awards. And between those three laboratories, we have an extensive amount of peer-reviewed research funding. So it's a very powerful group of scientists. We also have many clinical research opportunities, both in data informatics as well as clinical trials. And oftentimes residents with limited time will tend to focus on things that are slightly less related to direct basic science. We do sponsor a joint appointed biostatistician who is physically in our department a period of time during the week. We have a full-time master's in public health who is focused on bioinformatics, another full-time NPH who's a clinical research coordinator focusing on benign research, and currently we have a visiting fellow in urologic oncology research from Barcelona, Spain. So this is just a snapshot of where we are normally. Oftentimes these days we're somewhat distributed, but this is our workplace. This is a helicopter view of the main campus, which if you've been to Manhattan is in the very northern tip of Manhattan near the George Washington Bridge, which you see in the upper left-hand corner of this slide. It's referred to as Columbia University Medical Center. It's actually about a 36 square block campus, which has both our main pediatric hospital, the Children's Hospital of New York, as well as our main adult hospital on the campus. Also has an extensive amount of research space. The building that's being pointed to there is the Herbert Irving Pavilion. That's where our outpatient facilities are. It's directly adjoined by the Milstein Hospital, which is our major 900-bed inpatient unit. That's where our operating rooms are. About a block and a half to the east is the Morgan Stanley or New York Children's Hospital, which is a freestanding children's hospital on our campus. All of our pediatric urology activities are based there. And then further from there, we have several satellite locations, one of which is known as the Allen Hospital, which is just about 25 blocks north of our location in Upper Manhattan at the tip of the Bronx in Manhattan. Further north than that, we have an outpatient facility in southern Westchester County, New York, which does have a residency rotation, and that's Lawrence Hospital. And then just a little bit to the south of that, we have the aforementioned Bronx VA. It's also known as the James J. Peter VA Medical Center in the Bronx. That's just close to the Allen Hospital, and we have a rotation there at all times. Okay, I'm going to take a break here and turn it over to Dr. Kimberly Cooper, who's going to walk you through some of the fundamentals of the residency program as it exists today, and then we'll walk you through the rest of the program. Thanks for your attention.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You can all hear me okay, Gina? We're good?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. I can advance the slides for you if you'd like.
Sure. Great. All right, so you can see here our vision statement. We hope to train residents to investigate non-invasive therapeutic options when possible and provide innovative surgical therapy whenever necessary. And we have specialists in all domains within urology, which is very important for as you contemplate training somewhere, you want to make sure you get exposure to everything within urology. So I'm the residency program director, and Laura Vargas is our program coordinator. Okay, so we have our core rotations. We are mostly based at the main site where Dr. McKiernan just showed you the buildings, the Milstein Hospital and the Children's Hospital. But then we also have the other sites that he mentioned, the Lawrence and the VA. We also have ambulatory urology built in within the residency, and then the basic science and translational research. So we are a 6-year program. The first 3 years are clinical urology, and within the first year, the internship, the interns do rotate through general surgery for 8 months and spend 4 months in our department in urology. Then it's 2 full years of clinical urology. The 4th year is a research year, and then the 5th and 6th year are clinical urology again. So within the first year, the internship, you could see here a smattering of different rotations. Some of them are mandated in the residence. The interns will always rotate through the surgical ICU and the ER, and then several other specialties within general surgery. And then they, as I said, they spend 4 months with us. Okay, then the next 2 years, the clinical years, the PGY2s spend actually the entire year at the Milstein Hospital, rotating, however, on different services. They are working within the inpatient service, and then also they head up the acute care urology service that Dr. McKiernan alluded to before, which is basically our inpatient consultative service, and a designated PGY2 resident runs that with the attending supervision, of course. And then the PGY2 spends some months on the float rotation to triage things overnight. and see the patients in the emergency room and handle all consults overnight. PGY3 consists of pediatric rotation. The residents spend 2 months right now on pediatrics, although that always changes, and we can talk about that in the future. But we certainly change year to year based on the needs and the volume within our program. We build in a few months of ambulatory urology so that the residents are spending time with us in our outpatient offices, getting to see how urology is practiced in the non-inpatient world. The Bronx VA that we talked about before, several months on float, and then also a couple of months on the Milstein service when the PGY2s are working as float. For the dedicated research year, we got a lot of questions about this, but suffice it to say that there are vast opportunities. We are Columbia University, and we encourage people to work with scientists throughout our university. Doesn't necessarily need to be research projects that are just within urology. People really have done the gamut. A lot of people focus on clinical research projects. We have esteemed scientific faculty that Dr. McKiernan introduced before, and we also have the whole university at our disposal. So there's a lot of different projects that come out of this year, and it's driven by what the interests of the residents are, not by what we would like the residents to do. Getting back the last 2 years are clinical again. The PGY5 spend more time in the Milstein service functioning as a senior resident. They go to the Lawrence Hospital, which, to remind you, is a suburban hospital in Westchester. They serve as the pediatric chief resident and then get another opportunity to go back into the ambulatory world. And then finally, our residents finish out as a chief resident on the Milstein service, overseeing all of the inpatients on the main surgical service in the hospital. They also serve as the Bronx VA chief. And then the chief residents for the last several years have spent 2 months on the renal transplant service. This was developed several years ago in conjunction with the transplant service. We have a huge service at our hospital. They do a lot of kidney transplants, and we thought it would be an excellent opportunity for our residents to get exposure to open renal surgery. And so that's the goal of that rotation. And then we also allow for a few months of elective time. The call schedule is here. I don't want to focus too much on this, but suffice it to say it is not an onerous call schedule. You may notice that the PGY4s are listed. That is the research year. This is a new change that was implemented a few months ago at the residents' request because they felt that they did not like being out of the clinical environment for a year. So they actually petitioned to take a few calls throughout the year just to keep their feet wet and be able to help out with call responsibilities. And here's the VA call schedule, also not onerous, and it's call from home. So what about didactics? Well, we have a lot of didactics in our program. We think it's very important. Obviously, we are here to educate the residents, and we learn a lot from the residents as well. So conferences are incredibly valuable. Monday mornings, we have a multidisciplinary tumor board where we collaborate with the medical oncologist that Dr. McKiernan mentioned, radiation oncologists, pathologists, and the residents present cases and also talk about indications for cases that will be going on in the next week. So it's a combination of indications and discussing relevant oncologic material. Wednesdays, Dr. Bottolato heads up a board review session that's incredibly popular with the residents, and it's an informal session, but a very high yield to just make sure the residents are learning all the different topics in urology appropriately. And then Thursday is the day where our whole department gets together for different types of conferences. Once a month, we have a quality and patient safety conference. We do a journal club once a month, and then we have a multitude of other options for grand rounds. We show you this because it's important as you're contemplating where you may want to train. You also want to think about what your life will be like when you finish your training. And it's important to make sure that you think about this because you want to go somewhere that will help set you up for life beyond residency. So this shows the last 5 years of our graduates and where they went on. Several of them went on to do fellowships, a few are in private practice. And you can see there's some great geographic distribution here as far as places throughout the country where people go off to train for further fellowships or practice. And then here you can see that we have alum throughout the country, and you could just see it listed geographically here. So it's important, you're all going to be looking at programs throughout the country, and you may run across some of these people. So you can see that they got their start at Columbia Urology, and we're very proud of them. The majority, you can see it's not surprising we're in New York, so we do have a lot of alums who are in this area, in the tri-state area, and they are listed here. Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Anderson.
Hi, hope everyone can hear me and see me. It's good to be here today.
We can hear you and see you.
Good, good. Wanted to talk, spend a few minutes here talking about what's been going on in our department over these past 3 months or so during the COVID pandemic. As many of you know, New York City got hit as hard as anywhere probably in the world with COVID, and we were right square in the middle of it here at New York Presbyterian Hospital. So by around mid-March, we had shut down all of non-urgent outpatient visits and all of our elective and non-urgent operations as well. And shortly thereafter, we got called in for deployment. This was a voluntary deployment. And let me see, Gina, can you advance that slide for me? Sorry, guys. Okay. And so we were sent to the emergency department. Dr. McKiernan got the call that urologists needed to be deployed, and and volunteered immediately. Told them that we would be ready to go anywhere, anytime. And so we were sent to the emergency department. And initially we were sent there as our own service to assist the emergency department with this huge burden of COVID patients that was coming through the doors routinely. And then we kind of assumed a leadership position down there. Actually, we banded with a coalition of other subspecialists, radiation oncologists, orthopedics, ENT doctors, ophthalmology, rehab medicine physicians, and we led this group of doctors down the emergency department, and ultimately led to the creation of an ICU down there. We had recognized fairly quickly that that there was a need for a lot of critical care in the emergency department, and they were not exactly equipped to do that at the time. So we seized the opportunity. Not only did we physically staff the ICU and lead the deployment, we also helped educate this team about how to take care of ICU patients and how to manage respiratory distress and vent settings and so forth. This is a presentation that we gave, and this is Dr. Kurtzman here, who was kind of the leader of this effort, who delivered this talk to this group of other doctors. And you can see here, this is kind of getting in the weeds about ventilatory care, intensive care. This is what we did here for about a month and a half. We were doing this work. Gina, do you want to talk about Empire?
Yes, no, in terms of innovations in education, we had to think about different ways to keep resident education going during the COVID pandemic. And what started out as an initiative amongst Dr. Cooper and our residents to continue daily didactics within our department gradually expanded into a resident-led initiative within the New York section that we're very proud of, and really outside of our section to unite speakers within the New York section and across the country to give daily educational lectures to our residents. So while this was supported by the New York section, this was an initiative really that was fueled by the innovation and the spirit of medical education within our residency program.
Great, yes. And so, some of the other things that we did to try to continue and advance resident education where one of them was this, what we call the CIRC curriculum, or the Surgical Interactive Resident Curriculum. And the thought was that even though we weren't doing very many live surgeries due to the COVID restrictions, we still felt that there was a lot of opportunity for surgical teaching outside of the operating room. And this is really not something that we had done very much of previously. So we decided to give it a try. And in fact, I think it was quite successful. Many of the different attendings would sign up to present a given surgery. Many of these were laparoscopic or robotic surgeries that had either the attending's own videos or other videos. Also many endoscopic surgeries. Anyways, we would present these videos and walk residents through the cases and try to learn about the key steps of the procedure and some of the key anatomy. And I think it was actually quite a rich learning experience that hopefully we'll be able to continue going forward. The other thing that we did, this was actually a brainchild of a group of the residents, was a robotic simulation fantasy league, where if you aren't familiar with the Da Vinci robot, there's a simulator. And it's like a video game that attaches to the robot, and you can sit down at the robotic console and you can do these simulations to help improve your skills and so forth. So anyways, we tried to make it a little bit more interesting with a couple of teams who would compete. I believe my team was in approximately last place when we last checked, but it was nonetheless a good opportunity to try to advance some of the surgical simulation outside of the operating room. Gina, you want to take it back from there?
Yeah, great. I'd like to turn this slide back over to Dr. McKiernan.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That's a great review. And really everything that was just reviewed were sort of reactionary innovations in a moment of crisis. The development of the Empire series, the CERC educational component of things, the emergency room rallying. These are things that happened on the fly without necessarily any preparation by predominantly our residents' innovation with our faculty support, honestly. And we really just highlight them to try to give you an indication of what the spirit and culture of our program is, which is difficult to do over a Zoom call or webinar. But I think these are great examples. We don't know what the future holds, but I think you can learn a lot from departments and institutions as to how they respond in a time of crisis. And I'm personally very proud of everything that's gone on here in the last 2 or 3 months. So some of the concerns about this, though, is that, well, what happens to a program when you shut down? If you're a resident, you don't maybe get to learn as much if there's no clinic and no OR, and it's difficult to learn just from videos. So we thought that we would, give you a little bit of an overview of what's actually going on here, but also what's going on at the moment, and how are we accommodating the transition back to full-time clinical practice and face-to-face volumes. So there's no question throughout this entire period, we've remained dedicated and committed to both resident education, medical student education, and although relatively low volume, high quality patient care. So here's a graph that we use in some of our internal discussions. This is the percentage of baseline office and OR volume or activity since March 16th. So if you followed this pandemic, March 13th was when New York Presbyterian Hospital closed its doors to elective surgery. That was 3 days prior to the government mandate in New York State. So that's when everything sort of shut down here in New York. And if you look at the OR volume for the following several weeks, it was running in the range of single digits of what we normally would do from a percentage volume perspective. So we developed a triage system for all patients who needed surgery. We were only allowed to operate on people whose lives would be adversely affected if they did not have surgery within 48 hours. And we subsequently saw a period of about 8 to 10 weeks where our volumes dipped well below 10%. The blue line is the exact same metric for how many in-person clinical visits we were doing during that period of time and how much our clinic volumes decreased. And as you see, over late April into early May, a continual but slow gradual ramp up until late May here where the data cuts off, where we're back up to about 50 to 60% of quote unquote historical normal if you use January and February, for instance, this year as a historical version of normal. So the process of reopening nationwide is obviously happening. It's happening at different paces in different areas. In New York City, I think this is relatively representative of where New York City medicine is at the moment. It's probably about 50 to 60% back to normal, but changing every week and going up at a relatively steady rate, hopefully barring any new outbreaks of the virus.
Great. Yes, that addresses some of the questions that have come up in the chat about volume and recovery. So thank you for that overview. I won't belabor this slide much. This has been discussed by the SAU panels and likely disseminated to you from your medical schools. You're all aware of the altered match timeline that we have this year. And we are currently exploring different ways to get to know our applicants better. Right now, we are exploring the possibility of a virtual visiting sub-internship. Those plans have not yet been crystallized. It's something we're looking into. We would approach it from a small group type of format in a way that would not only teach you urology, but also focus on the culture of our department. But the future of that remains to be seen at the current time. And we encourage you to follow us on social media for updates on how to get to know us better. So I want to turn over the next half of the presentation to our resident team who's on the line. We'll give you a little bit of a depiction of what it's like to be a resident here, why they chose to train here, and what their experience has been like thus far.
Hey there, guys. I'm a PGY4 at Columbia. My name's Mike Smigelski. Pleasure to be here with you. And I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about our residents and some of the characteristics that I think we have. So here you can see the cohort of our residents from that picture Dr. McKiernan was sharing before. Okay. So I think one of the characteristics, some of the characteristics that we have, we come from across the country. Our group hails from a wide variety of medical schools, wide variety of hometowns. We tend to be very well traveled. People have gone abroad for various parts of undergrad, medical school, global health initiatives, and travel's kind of a big thing for our cohort. We're about 50% married, so I'd say about half of the people here are married, half unmarried. We're all renters because it's New York City. Here you can see a graph of our hometown. So there's people hailing from the West Coast, people coming from the South in Texas, people from the Midwest, and from the East Coast. And on the next slide, we can see our medical schools. So wide variety of institutions here, a fair amount of people from Columbia, but a lot of residents coming from other institutions and backgrounds. Next slide. Is it able to advance, Gina? I'm sorry. All right. So yeah, in terms of traits that we have, you know, we're definitely hardworking. I think anywhere you go for a surgical residency, you're going to find that people are willing to work, get good case volumes in. So, you know, we spend a good amount of time working together, but we do it with a smile on our face. And I think we really enjoy being around each other. We're also an intelligent group, and as a surrogate for that, we present at a lot of academic conferences. We have a lot of departmental conferences that Dr. Cooper talked about. They're both informative, and I think we genuinely enjoy learning from each other. And then the next trait that we have, the next slide. Here we go. We're a personable group. I think the residents and the faculty really get along well. Probably my favorite thing within our department is the people. That is inclusive of both the residents, the cysto staff, the OR staff, the techs at the hospital, the floor nurses, and especially our own resident cohort. We go out together, we hang out in the hospital together, and then we get to spend time with faculty who are interested in you as a person. And we get to spend time with cysto staff who really get to know you and kind of become a second family for you. And then lastly, we're an extremely fun-loving group. We go to each other's weddings, we go to black tie events, we go out, we hit sports games together. Anything you can think to do, we're oftentimes doing with our own resident friends. And I can honestly say I've made some of the best friends in my life here at Columbia. And I think that is probably our strongest asset as a program, is the cohort of people that you're going to get to meet here. So here you can see our residents organized by a PGY year. We're a great group and we'd love to have you.
Hi guys, Miad here. I'm one of the PGY2. So I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about our work life. So Dr. Cooper and Dr. McKiernan mentioned all the different hospitals that are involved. I know it's hard to kind of grasp all that information, but we do have a lot of sites where we operate, and we have different rotations set up at the different sites. But something that's unique to our program is we have outside of a main OR platform, we also have what's called a cystoscopy suite or cystoscopy operative suite, and that's primarily out of the Milstein Hospital. So in addition to operating at a children's hospital, in addition to operating at some of our satellite hospitals and our main hospital, we have a dedicated OR suite where we do mostly all of our endoscopic procedures at the Milstein Hospital. And here's just a list of all those procedures. We are very, very fortunate to have a dedicated staff who know the ins and outs of every resident, every attending, and their styles. And we get to do all sorts of procedures from cystos to bladder biopsies, prostate biopsies, and even PCNLs. And these staff are amazing. We're very close with them. They put up with us, but we love them very much. And this is something that's unique to us. And I don't think across the board, at least when I was interviewing and doing sub-Is, I didn't see this elsewhere. So it's very neat to have this as a part of our program. And outside of that, yeah, again, we're very, very close with our fellows and cysto staff and the residents who primarily spend the most of their time in the cystoscopy suite, which is the third years and the second years. We become very close. So that's just us just fooling around. We do have a lot of operative volume in the main ORs across all the sites. Probably weekly, we do a bunch of scrotal cases. A lot of the general urologists will do scrotal cases, but we have high oncologic volume, reconstructive urology. We do laparoscopic and robotic, but there's also a very heavy caseload of pediatric urology, especially with another pediatric urologist coming. We do infertility cases. This is just some of the more, as you get more senior, you spend more time in the main OR, but you have exposure to a lot of different areas of urology. It's the best stuff.
All right. So the next thing we wanted to tell you about was just a little bit about the city that we live in. I'm sure you're all familiar with New York and a lot of the benefits that the city can have. Next slide. So we live in the city called the Big Apple, certainly the most populous city in New York, the financial and cultural capital of the world. Tons of globally recognized architecture that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Next slide. We have tons of different types of art here. So there's plenty of different interesting museums you can visit. We've got tons of big events like the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, Christmas tree lighting, certainly a ton of television shows filmed in New York, and we have plenty of music venues that a bunch of the residents visit. And then on to the next slide. So we may not necessarily be the city of champions, but definitely the Yankees are claiming their fair share. So we've got plenty of football, basketball, baseball, everything you can possibly imagine. I know residents have made it out to Belmont Stakes, to the golf championship at Bethpage. We get soccer and baseball tickets from the hospital, so we can go to those events. I attend the New York Marathon every year and the US Open tennis event every year, so it's easy enough to get to anything like that, and you'll definitely have the opportunity to enjoy it. And I know some people are worried that New York might be too urban and they'll miss out on the outdoors. Well, we have a ton of parks here, a lot of open outdoor space. It's very easy to get to the beaches. I know Elizabeth Sebesta, Alex Smalls previously have spent a lot of time making like the half-hour trek out to the beaches, getting some sunshine. Easy enough to get up to the Catskill Mountains to go hiking. We've got lots of biking opportunities, lots of running opportunities. And if you're a skier, Vermont and both the Catskills are not that far away. And one of the biggest benefits, certainly, of living in a metropolis like New York is the transportation and accessibility of the city. The subway generally runs 24/7, except in global pandemics. It's inexpensive, easy to get around. There's plenty of automobiles. I would say about 50% of the residents have their own car, but you definitely do not need to. There's trains going up to the Catskills, like I mentioned, out to the beaches on Long Island, down New Jersey. There's an Amtrak. We've got 3 major airports. There's city bikes. There's Revel mopeds that you can ride, and everything is very walkable and reachable without a car. And lastly, we have unparalleled food options, incredible shopping, great comedy scene. We're a diverse city. There's plenty of breweries, distilleries, vineyards, and you're definitely going to be getting visits from your loved ones, because who doesn't love to take a little vacation to New York? So, and then I think a lot of people coming to New York are concerned about the affordability of the city. It's actually more affordable than you would think. A lot of people find a roommate to live in housing, but up by Columbia, or if you go across the bridge to New Jersey, they're relatively inexpensive housing options. And then one of the benefits of being here is that we get paid more than pretty much every other resident in the country as a starting salary. And that goes up a little bit every year. You also have excellent healthcare benefits. We get 4 weeks of vacation, low transit costs, and I really think it's actually pretty affordable deal. This is just a map of the city, so you can see where we live. We have a number of residents in Brooklyn. We have some people on the lower side, Chelsea. We've got Upper West Side covered, some people up by the hospital. We have some residents in the Bronx. Historically, we've actually had a contingent with families in New Jersey, so if you're concerned about that, I would say 4 out of the past 5 years, we've actually had residents living there. So it's easy no matter what, and we're kind of spread out, but we still spend a lot of time hanging out together.
Hey, I'm Elizabeth. I'm one of the chief residents. I'm going to talk quickly about our resident life outside of the hospital. I can't advance the slide. There we go. So we have several department events every year that the whole department enjoys outside of the hospital. Dr. Cooper holds a barbecue every summer, which is a nice way to get together. And at the beginning of the year, we have an annual holiday party. And we also have graduation with roast of the chief residents. We have several community outreach events every year. Here are just a few. Fans for the Cure holds an event every year at Yankee Stadium that we're a part of to promote men's health and early detection of prostate cancer. And then the Velocity Bike Ride to End Cancer, which is a cycling event to benefit Columbia's Cancer Center that always has a strong urologic cancer component. We have several resident events with the AUA New York section. We're the only section that is, a city itself. We have a essay contest for residents every year that we all submit to and spend a full day presenting our research. There's a chief resident debate where chief residents from the different programs in New York debate each other. And then often we participate at the Residents Bowl in the AUA annual meetings. And then we all present at numerous academic conferences throughout the year. We have the dedicated research year like we talked about. So that gives a lot of time for us to conduct research and also to travel to several different meetings nationally and internationally to present our research and network. And then most importantly, we do a lot of things together as a resident group that have nothing to do with urology at all. We take vacations together, we celebrate each other's birthdays, we go to each other's weddings, and go to happy hour together. And I think all these pictures are just a testament to the fact that we genuinely hang out together a lot and actually really like each other, which is one of the best parts of the residency program.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all the residents for that wonderful overview. I think sometimes a picture speaks 1,000 words, and you get a sense of the culture of our department, the family type of atmosphere, how tightly knit the residents are. And in my opinion, that's probably one of the biggest strengths of the program is the family type atmosphere here. We're coming upon a little over the hour mark, but I want to take a moment to answer some questions that have been posted in the question and answer session. First question, maybe it can be addressed by Elizabeth or Michael, who have done their research years. are the research years fully funded? What have you done during these years? And this person is specifically interested in public and global health opportunities. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I know that Dr. DeCastro has a strong interest in global health, and he had talked to me at least before about going on one of his trips during my research year to, I think he goes to Palestine for several weeks to operate, and he had discussed that. In light of the pandemic, that really wasn't going to be an option necessarily. I know Christina Carpenter does something similar. I didn't necessarily fully flesh out or explore any of those plans myself, but I think the department probably would have been supportive had I tried to arrange that and express some interest in that. So if that's something you want to do, you know, go operate abroad for a couple weeks. Some of our faculty are doing that, and they sound, at least in my experience, more than willing to have you along.
Yeah,
There
I
are also,
agree.
Gina, can I add to that, that there are also
Yes.
opportunities that the AUA sponsors, the International Volunteers in Urology, where some of our residents have done that over the years during a vacation week where they've gone to operate in different places. But we also have several faculty members on staff who have masters in public health. And Mike Smigelski just mentioned Dr. DeCastro, but he also is a part of an initiative through Columbia University where he goes over to Africa and works with a program that does voluntary circumcisions for AIDS prevention. And we have talked about potentially getting residents involved in that. So suffice it to say, we have the Maryland School of Public Health right at our, next door to our medical center. And so there are vast opportunities to pursue global health initiatives with both faculty members within our department and then through the greater, overlook of Columbia University faculty as well.
Yeah, I agreed. A lot of our faculty partake in global health initiatives, and some of our residents have had IV UMed grants in the past. The next question is from someone that wants to know how best to prepare themselves for intern year and how our faculty prepares incoming interns from to begin their residency at Columbia. We'll say that the hospital does have orientation for all of our incoming residents. There's a dedicated department orientation, but we take it upon ourselves to teach you the basics coming in. We assume that you've done some training within your medical schools, you've done your sub-internships, but it's always good to review basic practices. Does anyone else want to comment on that
Sure.
process?
Sure, I can speak up as well. We mentioned that internship is now part of the urology residency as mandated by the ACGME, which is a change in the past year. But regardless of the semantics, we are very, very close with our general surgery colleagues. And so our interns partake in general surgery orientation as well. They do some surgery boot camps and, whatever they are doing with their residents for orientation, our interns participate. So that helps the residents, the interns get oriented to a surgical department. And then as Dr. Battalato mentioned, also there's the institution orientation. But we don't expect interns to start day one and know how to do a cystectomy. So obviously also, as Dr. Battalato said, we take it upon ourselves to help everybody acclimate. And I think another thing that is really important is that there's an enormous amount of mentorship within our program. So the interns will look up to the PGY2s who look up to the PGY3s, and everybody works really closely together. I think it's really terrific that the residents who have just finished the prior year of training don't just sort of wash their hands and say, okay, I finished that, I'm on, the next group is on their own. They help mentor them, and whatever challenges they face, they can help prevent those challenges. And so it really works from the top down, and that's a very consistent theme within our program that I'm really proud of.
Yeah. Another question pertaining to the research year, is research restricted to that year, and are there opportunities to collaborate with other institutions outside of our department and within New York City?
Okay, so absolutely it is not restricted to that year at all. In fact, we encourage residents. We are in the midst of doing mid-year evaluations right now, and Dr. McKiernan and I met with one of the current interns who's already thinking about research projects and started something when he had some downtime as an intern. We encourage that and welcome that. We also, as I mentioned, there's a lot of sort of top-down with the residents. It's the same thing with the research here. So the outgoing research residents often will talk to the PGY2s and PGY3s about projects that are ongoing. In most cases, projects take more than a year from the inception to culmination and manuscript production. So we get multiple layers of residents involved at different levels. We also do department-wide quality improvement projects that are led by the research residents, but all residents participate in various ways, whether they're clinically active or doing more of the research and analysis of outcomes. So we have a very, very strong team approach and try to incorporate people at all different levels, which includes research for sure.
Yes, and also we have the advantage of the entire health sciences campus, which includes collaboration with the School of Public Health, and also even undergraduate campuses such as the School of Engineering. Some of our residents in the past have done projects in collaboration with mentors from these other institutions. So we have a wide array of resources. And here, I'll ask this final question to close the session. Someone asks, what qualities in an applicant are we looking for when we're looking for what kind of residents would ideally fit at Columbia Urology? Maybe everyone can chime in on this one.
Dr. McKiernan, you want to start?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I'll take that one. First of all, I want to thank everybody's attention, interest, participation. This has been great. We're sometimes worried about how something like this can go over and how we can transmit the message, but I think you got a great snapshot of what our department's all about. What are we looking for in a resident? It's probably one of the most common questions. So I think it's true of almost all programs. Honest, hardworking, intelligent, motivated people who are passionate about the field they've chosen. You don't have to do anything to get ready. If you bring all those things to the table, we'll take it from there. We're in the business of building urologists to become excellent clinicians and academic contributors long term. All we need is the raw material to do it. And we have a pretty good idea what that looks like. This year may be more challenging because it's hard to meet people physically, but those are the attributes. We rely on things like scores and your grades and the school you go to, et cetera. But we're really looking for honest, hardworking people who have an outstanding passion for what they're doing. And as it's been said many times, if that's your approach, you'll never work a day in your life. If you love what you do, you're going to be successful at it, and we'll just be along for the ride to help you become successful.
Yeah, I would echo that, all the attributes that Dr. McKiernan just mentioned, but I also think in addition to that, we really do look to find people who want to be a part of a team and function as a team member, because there's nothing that's more, it's really critically important for patient care and for your own academic and social development, that you want to work with others and collaborate with others. And, during the residency, there was a pretty formative year, 6 years worth, where you're, post medical school, mid 20s, mid 30s. A lot of people are going through other changes in their personal life, both good and bad, dealing with challenges. And it's incredibly important that we take care of you and help you develop as a person as well. And so we want somebody who really wants to be a part of the team and be with colleagues who have similar interests.
Yes, agree with everything. We're looking for a diverse group of people, people who are different, people that are going to enrich our culture, people that are going to get along with one another. We're looking for people that are going to teach us as attendings. We learn from you. We learn on how you approach things. Columbia, one of the few medical schools that have a required urology urology rotation for the major clinical year for all medical students. So being a teacher is a very important part of what you're doing when you interface with students, your co-residents, and all of us as faculty. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and this webinar has now gone to about an hour and a half. I want to thank you all for your presence today. It was a pleasure for us to host each of you on this webinar. I thank our residents and faculty participants. We hope to keep in touch with you over social media in the next coming weeks about our definitive plans for the new sub-I season approaching us, and you can reach out to me or individually with any type of questions that arise. I know you've been in touch also with our coordinator, Laura, who's provided you with the registration link for this webinar, so she may be a conduit to get in touch with any of us with specific questions. All right, thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.